Hi, shalom friends. How many ways can you think of murdering a person? I know you didn't expect that question from me. Put that on a piece of paper. 5 ways of murder. You might pick something as exotic as a poison, something as basic as the knife or the gun, or just simply hold back the person from eating, drinking, or breathing. I don't suggest that you do this at all, but it's not hard to find a way to murder a person. Well, the next question would be, how likely are you to commit any one of those 5 acts? And I can almost feel your indignation. Rabbi, what's wrong with you? I sometimes lose my temper, but I would never willfully take a human life, not with a gun and not with poison. And yet, I'm going to suggest that there's another way to murder a person which leaves no fingerprints or any DNA. And it's something that not only can we do, but we often do it. And we do not realize the severity of it. And I'm referring to the concept of embarrassing a person publicly. The sages of the Talmud said, someone that is publicly humiliated, it's the equivalent of murder. And they observe when a person is very embarrassed, often he turns red with embarrassment, or turns pale, or a mixture of the two, which they liken to the shedding of blood. So you say, well, Rabbi, that's rabbinic license. Embarrassing someone is not murdering someone. And I'm going to ask you to consider the following. Can you remember a painful moment in your life? Perhaps it was a root canal. Maybe it was when you fell off a bicycle. Maybe you bumped into something. Maybe it was a minor accident. It hurt. There was no question about it that it hurt. And thank God you recovered. Now I ask you, 10 years later, can you feel that hurt? And in the vast majority of times, the answer is no. Thank God it was a bad bruise, but I recovered. I just remembered that it hurt a lot. But I really can't feel that pain anymore. But now contrast that with an emotional hurt. Let's say you had a very good friend and a terrible breakup, a loss of friendship. Or maybe there's a loved one that you're either separated from or, God forbid, died. So now you have an emotional pain, and I ask you, of the 2 pains, which is more painful? Many would say the emotional pain is far more painful. Not only that, but they could actually still feel that pain, though the breakup of the friendship maybe happened 10 years ago. And now I'll go a step further and say, well, if emotional pain is deeper and keener, how does the pain of being humiliated feel? And if God forbid, you were ever in that position of being humiliated in front of others, you begin to realize how painful it was then, and strangely enough, how painful it is now. Somehow the pain and the suffering, well, I shouldn't say suffering, I'll use the word pain, of humiliation doesn't go away. And indeed, in many ways, it is a murder, because when you were publicly humiliated, part of your ego, part of your self-awareness and self-value was killed. There are people who refuse to speak publicly because of an experience they had. There are other people who refuse to follow the desires of their heart because of that one time they tried, they attempted, they were humiliated, and they'll never do it again. A little part of them was murdered. I know it sounds a little bit harsh because we live in a society which has no feelings whatsoever. I'm offering an opinion now. When we read about a scandal or hear about a scandal, and often the scandal entails the type of information that publicly humiliates a public figure. And I often ask myself, was it really necessary for all of us to know? Is it important to humiliate a person? Of course, I often ask myself, if they actually, the people breaking the scandal or the scoop in the news, if they would have gone over to that individual and said, we have this and this information about you. It is proper for you to resign or to refuse yourself from something. Otherwise, we will publicize it. Perhaps they would have the same effect. But in doing so, they would A, allow this person the possibility to continue his life. B, it would spare the agony of the wife, the spouse, the children, the close friends. And I often wonder another thing. What happens when a scandal breaks, a person is humiliated, and then there's no evidence? Is there ever a way to undo that damage? Have you ever heard of the same fanfare which the scandal broke with the same amount of intensity, apologies, effusive apologies, will do everything possible to restore? So we're living in an environment where people are being publicly murdered, sometimes for good reasons, ostensibly, many times for no good reason whatsoever, merely to publicize or to become greater at the expense of someone else. I have to tell you, the Talmud uses the expression, he who humiliates someone publicly, especially for the sake of growing yourself, in other words, his downfall becomes your elevation, actually loses a share in the world to come. So why am I sharing this opinion with you? Because we're even those of us that are not in the media and are not guilty of this have a great responsibility when it comes to the information, and especially today with all of the Instagrams and Facebook and Twitters and so on. We get often information, sometimes pictures, which are embarrassing. And sometimes the picture that's being shared with us is being shared with us as a friend, but we pass it on further, not always maliciously, but we just pass it on. But we never stop to think, would the person who's in that picture, perhaps being portrayed in a silly way, and I'm being polite, would they really want it to go to the entire world? How often do we find people today being interviewed for a job and regretting the type of pictures and posts that they put on because people are misunderstanding them? Yes, it is a responsibility. And the way for you to be more considerate about this responsibility is to remind yourself, life and death is not only in the tongue. Life and death can be in your thumb, that text. I'd like to close with a wonderful Hasidic story. One of the great Hasidic masters, a true saint and a holy person, his name was Rabbi of Chernobyl. He was a very dedicated public servant, and people came to him for Torah study, for advice, and more often than not, for financial help. He had a heart of gold, though he had no gold. And whatever he had in his home, if there was a need, he would share with what he had. Story goes that there was a man who was rather desperate and came to the rabbi, and with a sad story. Whether or not all of the details were true, no one knows. But it was a sad story, and essentially, Rabbi, I need your financial help. So the rabbi looked in all of his pockets and in the desk, and all he could find was a couple of equivalent of copper coins, and he gave it happily and gladly and said, I'm so sorry I can't give more, but may God help you. And he went back to his books. In the meantime, this gentleman who's leaving actually acted quite brazenly. Instead of leaving the office and going out to the street, he decided to wander through the small house and noticed that the Rebbe had a Kiddush cup where he would use Friday night, and that was the one object that he had that actually had some value. So he takes the Kiddush cup. As he's taking the Kiddush cup to put into his sack, one of the kitchen crew comes and says, "Hey, you, stop that. What are you doing?" And as soon as he shouted, "Hey, you, stop," two other people that happened to be outside coming into the house came and said, "What's going on over here?" And this man who was caught in the act said, "What are you shouting at me? The rabbi said I could take it." And they were arguing with him, and the rabbi in his study heard a ruckus. He comes out. He saw three people accusing the man that had just left him of being a thief. The man looks at the rabbi and he says, "Rabbi, tell them, didn't you say I could take it?" And he sized up the situation in a moment. If he were to say the truth, "No, I did not say that," not only would he be caught in thievery, but more importantly, he would be embarrassed and humiliated. So the rabbi, without missing a beat, said, "Oh yes, I'm so sorry, to the people of the house. I gave him permission to take the Kiddush cup." Anything to do to avoid humiliation. But this guy had chutzpah. He looks at the rabbi and he says, "Rabbi, look, they accuse me falsely. I was embarrassed. I feel I need compensation for the embarrassment." To which the rabbi said, "You are quite right." Took out a loan on the spot from the people and paid him off so he should not be embarrassed. Now, it's a charming story. It's a true story. I don't know if we're on that level or anywhere close to it. But keeping that story in the background will certainly be beneficial. Shalom.